The forest floor was a tapestry of damp earth and decaying leaves, the scent of pine and wet stone filling the crisp night air. A slender figure, clad in dark leathers that hugged her form like a second skin, moved with a preternatural grace through the tangled undergrowth. Her name was Runa, and the silver light of the full moon painted streaks of platinum in her raven hair, which was braided tightly down her back. Her senses were a razor's edge, every rustle of a leaf, every distant snap of a twig, registering with crystalline clarity. She was a hunter, but tonight her prey was not some mindless beast of the woods. Tonight she hunted one of her own kind. Her mission, whispered to her in the shadowed sanctum of her pack's elders, was simple in its objective, yet it sent a tremor of unease through her very soul. Kill the Alpha of the North. A formidable task, one that had claimed the lives of warriors far more seasoned than she. The Alpha of the North, a figure of legend and fear, was said to be a brute of immense power, a ruthless conqueror who had carved out a vast territory with an iron fist. But for Runa, he was something more. He was a ghost from her past, a spectre that haunted her dreams. She was just a child, no older than 7, when her world had shattered. A rogue wolf, its eyes burning with a rabid fury, had torn through her family's small cottage on the outskirts of their territory. Her parents, brave and strong, had fought to protect her, but they were no match for the frenzied onslaught. Runa had been small enough to scramble into the narrow space beneath the floorboards, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs as she listened to the sounds of the life she knew being ripped apart. The rogue, its jaws dripping with the blood of her parents, had scented her. It had begun to tear at the wooden planks, its claws splintering the wood, its hot, rancid breath seeping through the cracks. Then, just as a pair of glowing yellow eyes had met hers through a newly formed gap, a blur of silver and black had streaked through the broken doorway. A wolf, larger than any she had ever seen, had slammed into the rogue with the force of a battering ram. The ensuing battle was a whirlwind of snarling fury, a symphony of tooth and claw that had shaken the very foundations of the cottage. The silver wolf, its fur shimmering like moonlight, moved with a fluid, deadly grace. It was a dance of death, and the rogue, for all its rabid strength, was outmatched. When the dust settled, the silver wolf stood victorious, its chest heaving, the blood of the rogue a dark stain on its magnificent coat. It had turned its head then, and its eyes, the colour of molten gold, had met hers. There was no malice in them, no threat. Instead, she had seen a profound sadness, a flicker of something that, even as a child, she had recognised as a shared pain. The great wolf had nudged the splintered floorboards aside with its massive head, offering her a silent escape. It had watched her crawl out, trembling and covered in dust, and had remained until the first rays of dawn had pierced the gloom, a silent guardian in the aftermath of her world's destruction. Then, as silently as it had appeared, it had vanished into the whispering woods, leaving her with an indelible image seared into her memory. Now, years later, that image was all she had of the wolf who had saved her. She had never spoken of it to her new pack, the Silver Moons, who had taken her in as an orphan. The memory was a fragile, sacred thing, a secret she held close to her heart. But the mission, the order to kill the Alpha of the North, had unearthed it with a brutal force. As the elders had spoken his name, a chilling premonition had snaked its way around her heart. And then, the bond had confirmed it. A faint, almost imperceptible hum had begun to resonate within her, a pull towards the north, a recognition that went deeper than memory. It was the nascent stirring of the mating bond, a sacred connection that every werewolf yearned for. The wolf who had saved her, the ghost of her past, was not only the Alpha of the North, but also her destined mate. And her pack, her family, had ordered her to kill him. Her journey north had been a solitary one, a pilgrimage into the heart of her own conflict. The landscapes had shifted from the familiar, gentle rolling hills of her own territory to the rugged, untamed wilderness of the north. The air grew colder, the trees taller and more imposing, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for a perpetually overcast sky. She had travelled for weeks, living off the land, her senses honed by years of training. With every league she crossed, the bond grew stronger, a persistent thrum against her soul that was both a comfort and a torment. It was a constant reminder of the man she was supposed to kill, the man whose life was intrinsically linked to her own. She had scouted the Northern Pack's territory for days, her movements as silent as the falling snow that now dusted the ground. The pack was larger and more organized than she had anticipated. Their patrols were disciplined, their warriors exuded an aura of quiet confidence that spoke of a strong and capable leader. There was no sign of the brutality and ruthlessness the Silver Moon elders had spoken of. Instead, she observed a community that was thriving, a pack that was fiercely loyal to its alpha. Tonight, she had finally breached their inner defenses, her skills as an infiltrator pushed to their very limits. The Alpha's dwelling was not a grand fortress, as she might have imagined, but a large, sturdily built lodge nestled in a secluded valley surrounded by ancient, snow-laden pines. Smoke curled from its chimney, a welcoming plume against the inky blackness of the sky. It was a picture of tranquility that was utterly at odds with the violence of her mission. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Runa slipped from the shadows of the trees and approached the lodge. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of her own making. The bond was a roaring fire within her now, a magnetic pull that was almost impossible to resist. He was close, so close. She could feel his presence, a powerful grounding force that seemed to settle deep within her bones. She found a window, its glass paned with thick, insulating sheets that were slightly fogged from the warmth within. Peering through a clear patch, she saw him. He was standing before a large stone fireplace, the dancing flames casting a warm, flickering light on his powerful frame. He was even larger than she remembered from her childhood memory, his shoulders broad, his presence commanding the entire room. His back was to her, but she could see the dark, wavy hair that brushed the collar of his simple, dark tunic. He was not the monster her elders had painted him to be. He was a man who was her mate. A wave of nausea washed over her. How could she do this? How could she raise a hand against the one who had saved her, the one her very soul cried out for? Her hand instinctively went to the hilt of the silver dagger strapped to her thigh, its cold, unforgiving weight a stark reminder of her purpose. The dagger was a specially crafted weapon, its blade imbued with wolfsbane, a poison deadly to their kind. A single scratch would be enough. He turned then, as if sensing her presence, and his eyes, those same molten gold eyes from her memory, seemed to lock onto hers through the glass. The breath hitched in her throat. The bond, already a raging inferno, exploded within her, a supernova of recognition and longing that threatened to consume her entirely. He was her savior. He was her target. He was her mate, and she was here to kill him. The Alpha of the North, whose name she now knew was Kalen, did not move. His golden eyes remained fixed on the window, a flicker of surprise in their depths, quickly replaced by a calm, knowing intensity. It was as if he had been expecting her, as if her arrival was not a disruption, but a long-awaited event. He made no move to sound an alarm, no gesture to call his guards. He simply watched her, his gaze a tangible thing that seemed to reach across the frozen night and touch her very soul. Runa's training, the years of relentless drills and brutal conditioning, screamed at her to act. To break the window, to lunge, to plunge the poisoned dagger into his heart before he had a chance to react. But her body was frozen, her muscles refusing to obey the commands of her mind. The bond, a force far more powerful than any training, held her captive. It was a torrent of emotions, a flood of sensations that she was ill-equipped to handle. She felt his strength, his loneliness, his surprise, and beneath it all, a deep, resonating sense of belonging. Her hand, which had been gripping the hinge of her dagger, fell limply to her side. The cold, hard reality of her situation crashed down upon her with the weight of a mountain. She was a soldier, sent to assassinate an enemy leader. But that enemy was her mate, the other half of her soul. To kill him would be to kill a part of herself. To fail her mission would be to betray her pack, the only family she had ever known. She was trapped in an impossible paradox, a cruel twist of fate that had made her a weapon against her own heart. Kalen took a step towards the window, his movements slow and deliberate, and a low, resonant voice, a voice that seemed to vibrate through the very air and into her bones, reached her, even through the thick glass. "You can stand in the cold all night, little moonbeam, or you can come inside." The name, Little Moonbeam, sent a jolt through her. It was a name she had not heard in years, a name her mother used to call her when she was a child. How could he know that? Was it a coincidence? Or was this yet another thread in the intricate web of fate that had bound them together? She should have run. She should have turned and fled back into the darkness, back to the relative safety of her solitude. But her feet, as if with a will of their own, remained rooted to the spot. The pull of the bond was too strong, the mystery of the man before her too compelling. With a sense of fatalistic resignation, she moved towards the door of the lodge. Her mission was to kill him, but in that moment, all she wanted was to be near him, to bask in the warmth of his presence, to understand the man who was both her savior and her intended victim. The heavy wooden door swung open before she reached it, revealing Kalen standing on the threshold. He was even more imposing up close, his height and breadth seeming to fill the entire doorway. He wore simple, dark clothing that did nothing to conceal the powerful musculature beneath. His face was ruggedly handsome, with high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and a mouth that was currently set in a neutral line. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the colour of liquid gold, and they held an ancient wisdom, a profound sadness, and a flicker of something that looked dangerously like hope. He said nothing, simply stepped aside, his gesture a clear invitation to enter. Runa hesitated for a fraction of a second, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. Then, with a deep breath that did little to calm the frantic beating of her heart, she stepped over the threshold, leaving the cold, unforgiving night behind her and entering the warmth of the lion's den. Or, perhaps, the warmth of her mate's home. At that moment, she wasn't sure which it was. As the door closed behind her, shutting out the biting wind and the silent judgment of the moon, Runa felt a subtle shift in the air, a palpable change in the energy of the room. The bond, which had been a raging inferno outside, now settled into a deep, comforting warmth that spread through her veins, chasing away the chill of the night and the deeper chill of her fear. It was a dangerous sensation, this feeling of rightness, of coming home to a place she had never been. Kaelin didn't press her for answers, didn't demand to know why an assassin from a rival pack was standing in his living room. Instead, he walked back to the fireplace, his movements fluid and unhurried. He picked up a poker and stoked the dying embers, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The simple, domestic act was so at odds with his fearsome reputation that it left Runa momentarily speechless. "You're from the Silver Moon Pack," he stated, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. "How did you know?" Runa asked, her own voice sounding small and strained in the sudden stillness of the room. He turned to face her then, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "I can smell it on you, the scent of the southern forests, of the river that runs through your territory. And," he added, his golden eyes meeting hers with an unnerving intensity, "I've been expecting you. Expecting me." Runa's brow furrowed in confusion. "Why?" "Because your elders are predictable," he said, his voice laced with a weary cynicism. "They've been trying to get rid of me for years. They've sent warriors, assassins, spies, but none of them have gotten as close as you." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her slender frame, her determined expression, the silver dagger that was still strapped to her thigh. "They sent their best this time," he murmured, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "They sent you." Runa's hand instinctively went to the hilt of her dagger, the cold, familiar feel of the weapon a grounding force in the swirling chaos of her emotions. "And you're not going to do anything about it?" she asked, a note of disbelief in her voice. "You're not going to call your guards? You're not going to fight back?" He chuckled, a low rumbling sound that seemed to come from deep within his chest. "And miss the opportunity to finally meet the little moonbeam who has haunted my thoughts for so long? I think not." Her breath hitched in her throat. You remember me?" "Of course, I remember you," he said, his voice gentle now, all traces of cynicism gone. "I remember a terrified little girl with eyes the colour of the midnight sky, hiding beneath the floorboards of a broken home. I remember the fierce, defiant spark in those eyes, even in the face of so much loss. I've never forgotten you, Runa." He knew her name. The realization sent another jolt through her, this one even more powerful than the last. He knew her name. He had remembered her, had thought of her, all these years. The knowledge was a balm to a wound she hadn't even known she carried. But it also made her mission all the more impossible. How could she kill a man who remembered her with such tenderness? A man who had been a silent guardian in the darkest moment of her life. How do you know my name? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I have my ways, he said evasively, his gaze once again drawn to the fire. The North is not as isolated as your elders would have you believe. We have our own sources of information, our own ways of keeping an eye on the other packs. He turned back to her, his expression serious now. I know why you're here, Runa. I know what they've sent you to do, and I'm not going to stop you. Her eyes widened in shock. You're not? No, he said, his voice firm. I'm not, because I know that you won't do it. How can you be so sure? She challenged, her voice gaining a bit of its former strength. I'm a trained assassin. I've killed before. What makes you think I won't kill you? Because of this, he said, and he took a step towards her, his hand outstretched. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could feel the power thrumming beneath the surface. Because of the bond. The same bond that led you to me. The same bond that is telling you, right now, that I am not your enemy. His words were like a key, unlocking a door in her mind that she had been trying to keep bolted shut. The bond, which had been a source of confusion and conflict, now flooded her with a sense of clarity. He was right. Every fibre of her being, every instinct she possessed, was screaming at her that this man, this alpha of the North, was not her enemy. He was her mate, her other half, but her duty, her loyalty to her pack, was a chain that had been forged in the fires of gratitude and obligation. They had taken her in when she had nothing, had given her a home, a family. How could she betray them? How could she choose a man she had just met, even if he was her mate, over the pack that had raised her? I can't, she stammered, taking a step back, the warmth of the bond suddenly feeling suffocating. I have my orders. I have my duty. Duty? Kaylin's voice was sharp now, tinged with a bitterness that seemed to come from a place of deep pain. Is it your duty to blindly follow the orders of elders who would send you to kill your own mate? Is it your duty to perpetuate a conflict that has been raging for generations, a conflict that has caused nothing but bloodshed and suffering? You don't understand, she said, her voice pleading. They're my family. They saved me. And what do you think I did all those years ago? He countered, his voice softening once again. I saved you too, Runa. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because even then, as a child, I saw the strength and the spirit within you. I saw a survivor. He took another step towards her, his golden eyes boring into hers. Your pack elders are using you, Runa. They're using your loyalty, your sense of duty, as a weapon against me. They know about the bond. They've known all along. They sent you here to die, one way or another, either at my hand or by your own when you realize the truth. The truth. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and ominous. What truth? What was he talking about? Her mind reeled, trying to process his words, trying to make sense of the new, terrifying possibility that had just been presented to her. Could it be true? Could her own pack, her own family, have sent her on a suicide mission? The idea was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that she wanted to reject it outright. But a seed of doubt had been planted, a tiny, insidious seed that was already beginning to take root in the fertile ground of her confusion and fear. She thought of the elders' strange, secretive behaviour in the days leading up to her mission, the way they had avoided her gaze, the way they had spoken in hushed tones when they thought she wasn't listening. She had attributed it to the gravity of the mission, but now she wasn't so sure. I don't believe you, she said, her voice trembling, but the words lacked conviction, even to her own ears. You don't have to believe me, Kalen said, his voice gentle once more. You just have to trust yourself. Trust the bond. Trust what you're feeling right now. He was closer now, so close that she could feel the warmth of his breath on her face, could see the flecks of gold in his mesmerizing eyes. He raised his hand again, and this time he did touch her. His fingers, calloused and warm, brushed against her cheek, sending a jolt of electricity through her that was far more potent than any poison. The touch was gentle, reverent, and it shattered the last of her defenses. A sob escaped her lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish, and she collapsed against him, her body shaking with the force of her emotions. He caught her, his arms wrapping around her in a strong, protective embrace. He held her as she wept, her tears soaking the front of his tunic. He didn't speak, didn't offer any empty platitudes or false reassurances. He simply held her, his presence a solid grounding force in the maelstrom of her despair. And in the circle of his arms, surrounded by the warmth of his body and the steady beat of his heart, Runa finally allowed herself to feel the full, overwhelming power of the bond. It was a feeling of coming home, of being seen, of being understood in a way she had never been before. It was a feeling of love, pure and unconditional. But even as she surrendered to the intoxicating pull of the bond, a cold, hard knot of fear remained in the pit of her stomach, because she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was only the beginning. Her mission may have failed, but the war was far from over, and she was now caught in the crossfire, a pawn in a deadly game with no easy way out. Runa's tears eventually subsided, leaving her emotionally drained, but with a newfound clarity. The warmth of Kalen's embrace had seeped into her bones, a stark contrast to the cold purpose that had driven her for so long. She pulled back slightly, her hands resting on his chest, the steady rhythm of his heart a comforting drum beneath her palms. Her eyes, still shimmering with unshed tears, met his. "What do you mean, the truth?" she asked, her voice raspy. "What truth are you talking about?" Kalen's golden eyes held a universe of sorrow as he looked down at her. "The war between our packs, Runa," he began, his voice low and somber. "It's all built on a lie that has been passed down for generations, poisoning the hearts of our people and turning us against each other." He guided her towards a pair of worn leather armchairs by the fire, his hand a warm, steady presence on the small of her back. She sank into the soft cushions, the fire's heat a welcome comfort against her chilled skin. Kalen sat opposite her, his powerful frame seeming to dwarf the chair. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze never leaving her face. Our ancestors, he continued, the first alphas of the North and the Silver Moons, were not enemies, they were brothers. They ruled this entire region together, in peace and prosperity. They were a force to be reckoned with, their packs united by a bond of brotherhood that was as strong as any mating bond. Runa listened, captivated, her own pack's version of their history, a starkly different tale of betrayal and conquest. "What happened?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A shadow fell upon the land," Kaelan said, his voice taking on a darker tone. A rogue, more powerful and cunning than any they had ever faced, began to terrorize the smaller, outlying settlements. He was a master of manipulation, a whisperer of lies. He sowed seeds of discord between the brothers, preying on their fears and insecurities. He convinced the Alpha of the Silver Moons that his brother, the Alpha of the North, was plotting to seize all the power for himself. A chill ran down Runa's spine, the story resonating with a disturbing familiarity. And the Alpha of the Silver Moons believed him? Kaelan nodded, a look of profound sadness in his eyes. He did. The rogue's poison had taken root, and the bond of brotherhood was broken. The Alpha of the Silver Moons, in a fit of paranoia and rage, launched a surprise attack on his brother. The Alpha of the North, caught off guard and heartbroken by the betrayal, was forced to defend his pack. The First Great War began, and the land ran red with the blood of wolves who had once been brothers. And the rogue? Runa asked, her voice tight. What happened to him? He vanished, Kaelan said, his jaw tightening. His work was done. He had shattered the unity of the two strongest packs in the region, leaving them to tear each other apart while he faded back into the shadows. Runa's mind reeled, the implications of his words washing over her in waves. So, the war, our war, it's all based on a lie. Yes, Kaelan confirmed, his voice heavy with the weight of generations of needless conflict. And the elders of your pack know it. They have the old scrolls, the true histories, but they keep them hidden, feeding our people the same old lies to fuel their own power and maintain their control. The seed of doubt that had been planted earlier now blossomed into a full-blown tree of suspicion. She thought of the way the elders clung to the old traditions, the way they ruthlessly punished any who questioned their authority. She thought of their insistence on her mission, their cold, emotionless eyes as they had sent her to her almost certain death. But why? She asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Why would they do that? Why would they perpetuate a war that has cost so many lives? Because they are afraid, Kaelan said, his voice laced with a bitter understanding. They are afraid of losing their power, their influence. They are afraid of the truth, of what it would mean for them if our packs were to ever find peace. A united front, like the one our ancestors had, would leave no room for their brand of tyrannical leadership. He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it gently. They are also afraid of us, Runa, he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper. They are afraid of the power of our bond, a mating between the Alphas of the North and the Silver Moons would be a symbol of unity, a catalyst for change. It would be the end of their reign of lies. Her breath caught in her throat. They knew about us? They knew We were mates? Kaelin nodded. They have their seers, their mystics. They've known for years that a powerful bond was destined to form between our packs. That's why they've been so desperate to eliminate me. They thought that by killing me, they could prevent the prophecy from coming to pass. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a picture that was both terrifying and sickeningly clear. Her mission had not just been an assassination attempt. It had been a calculated move in a much larger, more sinister game. She had been a pawn, a disposable asset in the Elders' desperate attempt to maintain their grip on power. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow, and it filled her with a cold, righteous anger. "They used me," she said, her voice low and venomous. "They used my loyalty, my gratitude. They used my past against me." "Yes," Kaelin said, his voice gentle but firm. "They did. But you are not a pawn, Runa. You are a queen, and it's time for you to choose your own side in this war." He stood up and walked over to a large, ornate chest that sat in the corner of the room. He opened it and pulled out a long, leather-bound scroll, its edges frayed with age. He brought it back to her and unrolled it on the small table between them. The scroll was covered in ancient, elegant script, the ink faded but still legible. "This is the true history of our packs," he said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. "Written in the hand of our first alpha. It tells the story of the two brothers, of their bond, of the rogue's betrayal. It is the truth that your elders have tried so hard to bury." Runa stared at the scroll, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. The proof, the truth that could either save her people or condemn her as a traitor. She reached out a trembling hand and touched the ancient parchment, the vellum cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze still fixed on the scroll. "I want you to read it," Kaelin said, his voice soft but unwavering. "I want you to see the truth for yourself. And then I want you to help me bring that truth to light. Help me end this war, Runa. Help me bring our packs back together." He was asking her to betray her pack, her family. He was asking her to risk everything, to stand against the only people she had ever known. But he was also offering her something she had never dared to dream of, a chance for peace, a chance for a future, a chance to be with her mate. She looked up at him, at his strong, handsome face, at the hope that shone in his golden eyes. And in that moment, she knew what her choice would be. She was no longer a pawn in someone else's game. She was a queen, and it was time for her to make her own move. "I'll do it," she said, her voice clear and strong, all traces of fear and uncertainty gone, replaced by a fierce, unshakable resolve. "I'll help you." A slow smile spread across Kaelin's face, a smile that reached his eyes and made them shine with a brilliant, golden light. It was a smile that promised a new dawn, a new beginning. And as Runa smiled back, a sense of hope, fragile but fierce, began to bloom in her heart. The path ahead would be fraught with danger, with betrayal and loss. But for the first time in her life, she was not alone. She had her mate by her side, and together they would face whatever storms lay ahead. They would bring the truth to light, and they would change the world. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, a strange and intoxicating blend of strategic planning and stolen moments of intimacy. Runa, now an honored guest in the heart of the enemy's territory, found herself in a world that was both foreign and surprisingly familiar. The Northern Pack, far from being the savage brutes her elders had described, were a proud and resilient people, their loyalty to Kaelin absolute. They were warriors, yes, but they were also farmers, artisans, and families, their lives woven together by a strong sense of community and a shared desire for peace. Runa spent hours poring over the ancient scroll, her fingers tracing the faded script as she absorbed the true history of her people. The story of the two brothers, their bond, and their tragic falling out resonated deeply within her, a poignant echo of her own internal conflict. With each word she read, her anger towards her own elders grew, a cold, hard knot of fury that settled deep in her chest. They had lied to her, to all of them, for generations. They had built a kingdom on a foundation of deceit, and she was determined to be the one to bring it all crashing down. Kaelin was her constant companion, his presence a source of strength and comfort. He would sit with her by the fire as she read, his quiet presence a silent testament to his trust in her. He answered her questions patiently, filling in the gaps in the historical record with his own knowledge, passed down through the generations of Northern Alphas. He showed her the hidden passages in the lodge, the secret escape routes, the strategic vantage points. He was preparing her for the war that was to come, a war that would be fought not with tooth and claw, but with truth and cunning. But it was in the quiet moments, in the spaces between the planning and the preparation, that their bond truly blossomed. It was in the shared glances across a crowded room, the lingering touch of his hand on hers, the soft, stolen kisses in the shadowed corners of the lodge. They were two halves of a whole, their souls entwined in a dance as old as time itself. And with each passing day, the bond grew stronger, a radiant, unbreakable thread that connected them, mind, body, and soul. One evening, as the snow fell softly outside, blanketing the world in a pristine white silence, Kaelin led her to a hidden chamber deep within the lodge. The room was circular, its walls lined with ancient stones that seemed to hum with a quiet, primal energy. In the center of the room was a shallow pool of water, its surface as still and reflective as a mirror. "This is the heart of our pack," Kaelin said, his voice a reverent whisper. "The pool of ancestors. It is said that on the night of the full moon, if your heart is true, you can see visions of the past, of the future." Runa looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you are a part of this pack now, Runa," he said, his golden eyes gazing at her with an intensity that took her breath away. "Your future is intertwined with ours. And I want you to see what I see, what I've always seen." He led her to the edge of the pool and took her hands in his. The full moon, high in the night sky, cast a silvery beam through a small opening in the ceiling, illuminating the surface of the water. As they looked down, the water began to ripple, the still surface disturbed by an unseen force. An image began to form, hazy at first, then sharpening into a scene from the distant past. Runa gasped. She saw the two brothers, the first Alphas, standing side by side, their arms clasped in a gesture of brotherhood. They were laughing, their faces filled with a youthful exuberance, their bond a palpable force that seemed to emanate from the very water itself. The scene shifted, and she saw the shadow, the rogue, whispering his poison into the ear of the silver moon Alpha. She saw the seeds of doubt take root, the brothers' eyes clouding with suspicion and fear. She saw the first battle, the clash of two mighty packs, the land stained with the blood of kin. Then the image changed again, shifting to a more recent past. She saw herself as a child, huddled beneath the floorboards of her broken home. She saw the road, its eyes burning with a rabid fury, and then she saw him, Kalen, a magnificent silver wolf, streaking through the doorway to save her. She saw the sadness in his golden eyes as he looked at her, a sadness that she now understood was not just for her loss, but for the centuries of needless conflict that had led to that moment. The vision shifted one last time, and this time it was of the future. She saw herself and Kalen, standing before a great assembly of wolves, the silver moons and the northerners united as one. She saw the scrolls, the true history, being read aloud, the lies of the elders exposed for all to see. She saw a new era of peace and prosperity, a future where their two packs were once again a force for good in the world. The image faded, and the water returned to its still, reflective surface. Runa was trembling, her heart overwhelmed with a torrent of emotions. She looked at Kalen, his face illuminated by the moonlight, and she saw the same vision reflected in his golden eyes. "This is what we're fighting for, Runa," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is the future that we can build together." "I know," she whispered, her voice filled with a newfound sense of purpose. "And we will." Their plan was audacious, dangerous, and utterly necessary. Runa would return to the Silver Moon Pack, not as a failed assassin, but as a double agent. She would feign continued loyalty to the elders, all the while gathering information, sowing seeds of doubt among the warriors, and identifying those who might be sympathetic to their cause. The ultimate goal was to expose the elders' lies during the Great Council, an annual gathering of all the packs in the region, where a challenge to leadership could be made. The night before she was to leave, Kalen took her to the highest peak in his territory, a wind-swept promontory that offered a breathtaking view of the snow-covered landscape. The moon was a sliver in the inky black sky, and the stars were a brilliant, glittering carpet that stretched to the horizon. "I don't want you to go," he said, his voice a low rumble against the howling wind. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her as if to shield her from the cold. "I have to," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "It's the only way." "I know," he sighed, his breath warm against her hair. "But that doesn't make it any easier." He pulled back and looked down at her, his golden eyes filled with a fierce, protective love. He reached up and gently cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "Be careful, little moonbeam," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't take any unnecessary risks. Remember that you are not alone. I will be with you, always." He lowered his head and kissed her, a deep, passionate kiss that was both a promise and a farewell. It was a kiss that spoke of love and loss, of hope and fear, of the long, lonely road that lay ahead. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, a silent vow to find their way back to each other, no matter what obstacles lay in their path. As the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, Runa slipped away from the northern territory, her heart a heavy stone in her chest. She was returning to the lion's den, but this time she was not the prey. She was the hunter, and she would not rest until she had brought the truth to light and claimed the future that was rightfully hers, a future with her mate, the Alpha of the North. The journey back to the Silver Moon territory was a stark contrast to her journey north. The biting winds and snow-covered landscapes of the north gave way to the familiar, rolling hills and temperate forests of her homeland. But the familiarity brought no comfort. Instead, it felt alien, tainted by the knowledge of the lies that had been woven into the very fabric of her pack's existence. She approached the borders of her territory with a carefully constructed mask of failure and dejection. Her leathers were artfully torn and travel-stained, her expression a study in weary disappointment. She allowed herself to be captured by a border patrol, her feigned exhaustion and the carefully crafted story of her escape from the clutches of the brutish northern alpha, earning her a mixture of pity and contempt from Dabala. The warriors. She was brought before the Council of Elders, a group of 5 grim-faced wolves who sat on a raised dais in the heart of their sacred grove. The air was thick with tension, their eyes cold and calculating as they listened to her fabricated tale. She spoke of Kaelin's immense power, of his fortified territory, of the unwavering loyalty of his pack. She painted a picture of a formidable, almost unbeatable foe, a narrative designed to both explain her failure and to subtly inflate their own sense of security. "He is a monster," she said, her voice laced with a convincing tremor of fear. "He is more powerful than we could have ever imagined. I was lucky to escape with my life." The elders exchanged smug, knowing glances. Her failure was exactly what they had anticipated, what they had, in a sense, orchestrated. They saw her not as a failed assassin, but as a testament to the North's savagery, a propaganda tool to further fuel their people's hatred. "You have done well to survive, child," the eldest of the council, a wizened wolf named Jerris, said, his voice a dry, rasping sound. "Your testimony will serve as a valuable lesson to us all. The North is a threat that must be dealt with decisively and permanently." Runa lowered her head in a gesture of feigned humility, a cold fury simmering beneath the surface. They had swallowed her story, hook, line, and sinker. The first phase of her plan was complete. In the weeks that followed, Runa played the part of the broken warrior, her days spent in quiet solitude, her nights in whispered conversations with the few wolves she knew she could trust. She started with Finn, a young warrior who had always been a friend, his heart unburdened by the cynicism and prejudice that had poisoned so many of the others. She found him in the training grounds, his brow furrowed in concentration, as he practiced his forms. "You believe the elders' stories about the North?" she asked him one evening, her voice casual, her tone carefully neutral. Finn paused, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Of course," he said, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Why wouldn't I?" "Because I was there," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. And what I saw was not a pack of monsters. I saw a community, a family. I saw a leader who was strong, yes, but also just and fair. She told him a carefully edited version of her time in the north, omitting the part about the mating bond, but planting the seeds of doubt about the elder's narrative. She spoke of Caelan's honour, of his people's desire for peace, of the strange inconsistencies between what she had been taught and what she had witnessed. Finn listened, his initial skepticism slowly giving way to a dawning curiosity. He was a good wolf, his heart untainted by the elder's poison. He was the first crack in the wall of lies that surrounded their pack. Her next target was Alara, the pack's healer, a wise and compassionate wolf who had always treated Runa with kindness. She found her in the infirmary, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. Runa spoke to her not of war and politics, but of the suffering she had seen, the needless bloodshed caused by a conflict that seemed to have no end. "Is this the only way?" Runa asked, her voice filled with a genuine sorrow. "Are we destined to fight this war forever?" Alara sighed, her hands stilling their work. "The elders say it is our sacred duty," she said, her voice heavy with a weary resignation. "But my heart tells me that there must be another path." Runa knew then that she had found another ally. Alara, with her wisdom and her influence over the pack's well-being, would be a powerful voice for change. As the weeks turned into months, Runa continued her clandestine work, her network of allies growing slowly but steadily. She moved with the utmost caution, her every word and action carefully calculated. She knew that a single misstep could expose her, could lead to her death and the failure of their entire plan. The bond with Caelan was a constant presence, a silent source of strength and comfort in the lonely, dangerous world she now inhabited. They had no way to communicate directly, but she could feel him, a steady thrum of energy on the edge of her senses. She knew that he was waiting, that he was trusting her, and that knowledge gave her the courage to continue. The Great Council was to be held on the summer solstice, a time of great celebration and political manoeuvring. It was the one time of year when all the packs in the region came together, a fragile truce holding in the neutral territory of the Sunstone Glade. It was to be the stage for their grand unveiling, the moment when the truth would finally be brought to light. As the day of the council approached, the tension in the Silver Moon Pack grew palpable. The elders, buoyed by their own propaganda and Runa's testimony, were more belligerent than ever, their calls for a preemptive strike against the North growing louder and more insistent. Runa knew that time was running out. She sought out Jairus, the eldest of the council, under the pretense of seeking his wisdom. She found him in his private chambers, a dark, oppressive room filled with ancient, dusty tomes. "I have been thinking, Elder," she said, her voice filled with a feigned deference, "about the North, about the Alpha. I believe I may have a way to defeat him." Jairus's eyes, usually dull and lifeless, glinted with a sudden interest. "Go on," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "He has a weakness," Runa said, leaning in conspiratorially. "A hidden chamber, deep within his lodge. He calls it the Pool of Ancestors. He believes it gives him visions, that it is the source of his power. If we were to defile it, to poison the water, it would be a blow to his spirit, to the morale of his entire pack. It would make him vulnerable. She was playing a dangerous game, feeding the elders' own paranoia and superstition back to them. But it was a risk she had to take. She needed to create a diversion to draw their attention away from the true threat, the truth. Gyrus's lips curled into a semblance of a smile, a grotesque twisting of his wrinkled features. "A brilliant plan, child," he said, his voice filled with a malevolent glee. "A truly brilliant plan. You have done well. We will put your plan into action at the Great Council. While the other packs are distracted by the ceremonies, a small team of our best warriors will infiltrate the north and carry out your suggestion. And Runa's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and triumph. They had taken the bait. The stage was set. All that was left was for the final act to play out. The day of the Great Council dawned bright and clear, the sun casting a golden glow over the sunstone glade. The glade was a natural amphitheatre, a wide, grassy clearing surrounded by ancient, towering monoliths that hummed with a quiet, primal energy. The alphas of the various packs were seated in a circle in the centre of the glade, their warriors and pack members gathered behind them. Runa stood among the Silver Moon warriors, her expression a mask of calm indifference, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She saw him then, across the glade, standing tall and proud among his own people. Caven, her mate. His golden eyes found hers, and for a fraction of a second, the mask slipped, and a look of pure, unadulterated love passed between them. It was a silent promise, a shared moment of strength before the storm. The council began with the usual pomp and ceremony, the retelling of old stories, the reaffirmation of ancient treaties. But the air was thick with an undercurrent of tension, the animosity between the Silver Moons and the Northerners a palpable force in the glade. Gyrus, as the eldest of the Alphas, rose to speak. His voice, though frail, carried a surprising strength as he began to speak of the northern threat, his words a venomous tirade of lies and propaganda. He spoke of Kaelin's brutality, of his insatiable ambition, of the danger he posed to all the packs. Then he turned to Runa, his voice dripping with a false sincerity. "And we have a witness to his savagery," he said, gesturing for her to step forward. "One of our own, who was captured by the Northern Alpha and barely escaped with her life. Tell them, child, tell them what you saw." All eyes turned to her. This was it, the moment of truth. She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping over the assembled packs, over the faces of her own people, so many of them filled with a hatred that had been born of lies. She stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest, but as she opened her mouth to speak, it was not the words of a victim that came out, but the words of a queen. "I will tell you what I saw," she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing out across the silent glade. "I saw a leader who was just and fair, a pack that was strong and united. I saw a people who yearn for peace, not war." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Gyrus's face, which had been a mask of smug satisfaction, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "What is the meaning of this, child?" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "What treason is this?" "The only treason here is yours, Gyrus," Runa said, her voice rising in power, her gaze unwavering. "You have lied to us. You have lied to all of us. You have fueled a war that has cost countless lives, all to maintain your own power." She turned to the other alphas, her voice pleading. "The wall between our packs is built on a lie. Our ancestors were not enemies. They were brothers, and I have the proof." She pulled out a scroll, a perfect replica of the one Kaelin had shown her, which he had painstakingly created for this very moment. "This is the true history of our packs," she declared, her voice ringing with the conviction of the truth. "Written in the hand of our first alpha, it tells the story of the two brothers, of their bond, of the rogue's betrayal." A murmur went through the crowd, a ripple of confusion and disbelief. Jairus, his face a mask of rage, lunged for her, his claws extended. "She lies!" he shrieked. "She is a traitor, a spy for the North." But before he could reach her, a blur of silver and black streaked across the glade. Kaelin. He moved with a speed and grace that was breathtaking, intercepting Jairus with a powerful shove that sent the old wolf stumbling back. "The only liar here is you, Jairus," Kaelin said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He stood before Runa, a protective shield between her and the furious elder. He held up his own scroll, the original, its ancient parchment, a testament to its authenticity. "I have the original scroll," he declared, his voice resonating with a power that commanded the attention of everyone in the glade. "Let any who doubt her words come and see the truth for themselves." The other alphas, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension, rose to their feet. One by one, they came forward to examine the scrolls, their eyes widening in disbelief as they read the true history of their people. Jairus, his face a mask of desperation, tried to rally his warriors. "She is a traitor," he screamed, his voice cracking with fury. "He is our enemy. Kill them both." But his words fell on deaf ears. His own warriors, their faces filled with confusion and doubt, hesitated. They looked at the scrolls, at the other alphas, at the undeniable truth that was unfolding before them. They looked at Finn, who had stepped forward to stand beside Runa, his expression one of unwavering loyalty. They looked at Alara, who was tending to a warrior who had been injured in the initial scuffle, her actions a quiet testament to her own allegiance. The tide was turning. The wall of lies that Jairus and the other elders had built was crumbling, brick by brick. Then, a new voice cut through the tension, a voice that was both familiar and chillingly unexpected. "He's right, you know," a smooth, cultured voice said from the edge of the glade. "She is a traitor, and he is most certainly your enemy." All eyes turned to the speaker, a tall, handsome wolf with silver hair and eyes the colour of ice. He was flanked by a small group of warriors, their armour a strange, unfamiliar design. Runa's blood ran cold. She recognized him. She had seen him in the pool of ancestors. It was the rogue, the one who had started it all. The rogue smiled, a slow, predatory smile that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. "My apologies for the late arrival," he said, his voice dripping with a mock sincerity. "I had to make a slight detour, to the north, to a certain pool of ancestors." He held up a small, intricately carved vial, its contents a swirling black liquid. "A lovely little spot," he said, his voice laced with a malevolent glee. "A shame to have to defile it." Kaelin's face, which had been a mask of calm, controlled power, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "You," he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You're the one from the stories, the one who betrayed our ancestors." The rogue chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "Guilty as charged," he said, his smile widening. "And I have to say, it's been amusing, watching you all tear each other apart for generations. But all good things must come to an end, and I'm afraid your little reconciliation is not on my agenda." He raised the vial, his intentions clear. "It's time for a new era," he declared, his voice ringing with a chilling finality. "An era of my own making." And with that, he threw the vial into the center of the glade. It shattered on the ground, releasing a cloud of black, noxious gas that spread with an unnatural speed. The gas was not a poison, in the traditional sense. It was something far more insidious. It was a catalyst for rage, for paranoia, for the darkest, most primal instincts of their kind. Wolves who had been standing side by side moments before, united in their dawning understanding, now turned on each other, their eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. The sunstone glade, which had been a symbol of peace and unity, was transformed into a battlefield, a seething cauldron of chaos and violence. The rogue laughed, a high, manic sound that echoed through the glade. "Let the gains begin," he said, his voice filled with a triumphant madness. And as the world descended into chaos around them, Runa and Kaelin stood back to back, their hands clasped, their bond a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness. The war for their future had just begun. And this time, they were fighting not just for their packs, but for the very soul of their people. The black mist, thick and acrid, swirled through the sunstone glade, its insidious tendrils wrapping around the hearts and minds of the assembled wolves. Friends turned on friends, allies on allies, their eyes burning with an unnatural, red-hot fury. The air, which had moments before been filled with the murmurs of dawning truth, was now thick with the snarls of unreasoning rage and the clash of tooth and claw. Runa and Kaelin stood in the eye of the storm, a small pocket of calm in the swirling vortex of chaos. The bond between them, a radiant, unbreakable force, seemed to create a protective shield around them, repelling the insidious influence of the rogue's poison. They were an island of sanity in a sea of madness. "We have to stop him," Runa said, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and determination. She looked at Kaelin, his golden eyes blazing with a righteous fury. "I know," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "But we can't fight them all. We have to get to the source." He nodded towards the rogue, who stood on the edge of the glade, a malevolent puppet master, watching his creations dance to his tune of chaos. He was flanked by his own warriors, their eyes as cold and merciless as his own. "We need to create a diversion," Kaelin said, his mind already working, his strategic instincts taking over. He turned to Finn and Ilara, who had managed to fight their way to their side, their faces pale but resolute. "Finn, Take as many of the loyal warriors as you can and form a defensive perimeter. Protect the innocents, the ones who haven't succumbed to the poison. Ilara, tend to the wounded, but stay within the circle. We can't afford to lose you. Finn nodded, his young face set in a grim determination. You can count on us, Alpha, he said, his voice unwavering. He turned and began to rally the few warriors who had managed to resist the rogue's influence, his voice a clear, commanding call in the chaos. Ilara, her healer's bag already open, nodded her own assent. Be careful, both of you, she said, her eyes filled with a worried concern. Kaelin squeezed Runa's hand, his gaze locking with hers. Ready? He asked, a silent question passing between them. She nodded, her own eyes blazing with a fierce resolve. Ready. They moved as one, a blur of silver and black, streaking across the glade towards the rogue. They were a whirlwind of controlled fury, their movements perfectly synchronized, a deadly dance of two halves of a whole. They fought not with the blind rage of the poisoned wolves, but with the focused precision of seasoned warriors. They were a force of nature, a tidal wave of righteous fury that cut a swath through the chaos. The rogue watched their approach, a flicker of surprise in his cold, icy eyes. He had not anticipated this. He had not anticipated the power of their bond, the strength of their shared purpose. He had thought to divide and conquer, but he had only succeeded in forging an even stronger alliance between them. He gestured to his own warriors, and they moved to intercept Runa and Kaelin, their movements as fluid and deadly as their masters. The ensuing battle was a symphony of violence, a clash of titans under a sky that had turned a bruised and angry purple. Runa fought with a ferocity she had never known she possessed. The silver dagger, the one she had once intended to use on Kaelin, was now a blur in her hand, a silver serpent that struck with deadly accuracy. She was a whirlwind of motion, her movements a graceful, deadly dance. Kaelin was a force of nature, his raw power tempered by a lifetime of discipline and control. He was a silver wolf in human form, his every move a testament to his alpha strength. He fought with a controlled fury, his golden eyes blazing with a righteous fire. Together, they were unstoppable. They fought back to back, their bodies moving in perfect harmony, their bond a silent language that allowed them to anticipate each other's every move. They were a single, unified force, a testament to the power of a love that had been forged in the fires of adversity. But the rogue was a formidable opponent, his own power a dark and twisted mirror of their own. He was a master of a dark and ancient form of magic, a sorcerer who could twist the very fabric of reality to his will. He conjured shadow hounds, creatures of pure darkness, with teeth like razors and claws like daggers. He hurled bolts of dark energy that sizzled and cracked through the air. The battle raged on, a desperate, brutal struggle for the very soul of their people. Finn and his small band of loyal warriors fought valiantly, their defensive circle a beacon of hope in the swirling chaos. Ilara moved among the wounded, her healing hands a gentle balm in a world that had gone mad. Slowly, painstakingly, Runa and Kaelin began to gain the upper hand. They fought their way through the rogue's warriors, their determination unyielding, their bond a source of seemingly endless strength. They were bruised and battered, their bodies aching with 1,000 tiny wounds, but their spirits were unbroken. Finally, they stood before him. The road, the source of all their suffering. He was no longer smiling, his handsome face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You," he snarled, his voice a venomous hiss. "You should have died in that cottage all those years ago." He looked at Runa, his icy eyes filled with a chilling recognition. "And you," he said, his gaze shifting to Kaelin. "You should have left her there to rot. You were the rogue," Kaelin said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You were the one who killed her parents." The rogue laughed, a high, manic sound that sent a shiver down Runa's spine. "They were in my way," he said, his voice laced with a casual cruelty. "Just like the two of you are in my way now." He raised his hands, and a swirling vortex of dark energy began to form between them. The air crackled with a malevolent power, the ground beneath their feet trembling with the force of his magic. "It's time to end this," he said, his voice ringing with a chilling finality. "Once and for all." But as he prepared to unleash his final, devastating attack, a new sound cut through the din of the battle. It was a howl. A single, clear, powerful howl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. And then another, and another. From the edge of the glade, a new army appeared. The Northern Pack. They had come. Kaelin's people, drawn by the psychic distress call of their alpha, had arrived to turn the tide of the battle. They were a sea of silver and black, their eyes blazing with a fierce, protective loyalty. The rogue's face, which had been a mask of triumphant madness, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "No," he whispered, his voice a sound of disbelief. "This is not possible." But it was possible. The Northern Pack, a force to be reckoned with in their own right, slammed into the rogue's warriors with the force of a tidal wave, their arrival a turning point in the battle. The rogue, his concentration broken, his power momentarily faltering, was left vulnerable. And in that moment, Runa and Kaelin struck. They moved as one, their attack a perfectly synchronized symphony of violence. Runa with her silver dagger and Kaelin with his bare hands, a force of nature unleashed. They were the embodiment of justice, of retribution, of a love that had conquered all. The rogue, for all his power, was no match for the combined might of two souls united by a bond as old as time itself. They were the storm, and he was but a leaf in the wind. The final blow was struck not by a weapon, but by the truth. As they fought, Kaelin spoke, his voice ringing out across the glade, a clear, powerful counterpoint to the rogue's dark magic. He spoke of the two brothers, of their bond, of the lies that had torn them apart. He spoke of the rogue's betrayal, of the generations of needless suffering he had caused. His words were a balm to the poisoned minds of the wolves, a beacon of light that cut through the darkness of the rogue's magic. One by one, the red haze began to fade from their eyes, replaced by a dawning horror and a profound sense of shame. The rogue, his power base crumbling, his army of manipulated puppets turning against him, was finally defeated. He lay on the ground, his body broken, his dark magic extinguished. The battle was over. The sun, which had been hidden behind a veil of bruised and angry clouds, broke through, casting a golden glow over the sunstone glade. The air, which had been thick with the stench of dark magic and violence, was now filled with the scent of pine and wet earth, the familiar, comforting smells of home. The wolves, their minds now clear, looked at each other with a mixture of shame and relief. The war was over. The lie was exposed. The truth had finally won. Runa and Kaelin stood in the centre of the glade, their hands clasped, their bodies bruised and battered, but their spirits soaring. They were surrounded by their people, by the silver moons and the northerners, no longer enemies but allies, united by a shared experience and a common hope for the future. Jyress and the other elders of the Silver Moon Pack, their faces a mask of shame and defeat, were brought before them. They were stripped of their titles, their power broken, their reign of lies at an end. A new council was formed, a council of wolves from both packs, their leadership based not on lies and fear, but on honesty and a shared desire for peace. Finn, with his brave heart and unwavering loyalty, was given a place of honour. Elara, with her wisdom and compassion, was made the head of the new unified healing order. And Runa and Kaelin, the two who had been destined to be enemies, the two who had been brought together by a cruel twist of fate, now stood as the new alphas, the leaders of a new, united pack. They had faced the darkness and had emerged victorious, their bond a testament to the power of love, of truth, of a destiny that could not be denied. The road ahead would not be easy. There were wounds to be healed, trust to be rebuilt, a future to be forged. But they would face it together, side by side, their love a beacon of hope for a new generation. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Kaelin turned to Runa, his golden eyes filled with a love that was as vast and as deep as the endless sky. "My Alpha," he said, his voice a low, reverent whisper. "My mate," she replied, her own voice thick with emotion. And as he lowered his head to kiss her, a new howl went up from the assembled wolves, a howl not of war, but of celebration, a howl that echoed through the mountains and the valleys, a howl that heralded the dawn of a new era of peace, the era of the two alphas, the two mates, the two halves of a whole who had changed the world.